Hey man, I really messed up my shoulder. It hurts a lot and I have no idea what I did to it. Really? You should really get that checked out with Physio. Nah, I have no time to go to Physio and I really can't afford it anyways. Well, in that case, I have good news for you because you should check out this video that Cam posted. Oh sweet, free advice? Why not? What's up you guys? It's Cam with Cam Wong Physio here. Today I'm going to teach you how to assess your own shoulder. And basically what we're going to do is try to figure out whether your shoulder limitation to range of motion is due to weak shoulder, so muscle weakness, or if it's due to stiffness. And for most things throughout the body, neck, shoulder, wrist, hand, ankles, we can generally simplify and break it down to these two categories. Now to start off with, there are three main ranges of motion through the shoulder joint. Now there are obviously many ways you can move the shoulder, but the three primary movements will be flexion, which is going upwards toward the front, abduction, which is outwards toward the side, and then rotation, which can either be external rotation or internal rotation. And there are two ways we can test them to help us differentiate whether or not it's a muscle weakness or a stiffness of the shoulders, whether that be muscle stiffness, joint stiffness, capsular stiffness, and that's by comparing active range of motion versus passive range of motion. As the name implies, active range of motion just means we're moving our arms and our shoulders actively with our own muscles, versus passive range of motion is just us having some kind of external force, whether that be the therapist or using some kind of equipment. So in our case here, the only piece of equipment you're going to need is this stick. Maybe a bigger one. This is just my daughter's little broomstick that I stole from her. She's probably calling for it right now. All these tests, I want you to work within a pain-free range of motion. Once you hit that painful limit, I want you to stop, write down the value, so whether that be a percentage of how far you move through range, or write down the degrees of movements. And why I want you to do this is I want you to keep track of not only how much difference there is between your active and your passive range of motion, but it's a good way to kind of give yourself a baseline, seeing the improvement over time. So you can test this over time and see if you're getting improvements week over week, month over month. Test number one, flexion. We're gonna take our arms, you can do both at the same time. You're gonna actively move it through range into this forward motion. Again, stop if there's any kind of pain. Once you get to a point where you're like, okay, that's my limit there, oh, ouch. I want you to stop, take note of that degree, and go to the next part. So that was active test. Our passive test, we're gonna do exactly the same thing, but this time we're gonna be using our little stick here, and we're just gonna hold it nice and close together because that gives us the most support. And in this case, let's pretend my left shoulder is the one that's injured. I'm gonna use my right shoulder for all the support and all the movement. So my left shoulder is just going for the ride. My right shoulder is gonna be doing all the movement here. So my right shoulder is just gonna gently guide and assist my left shoulder up through movement here. Now you can also do this while you're lying down, which might be a bit easier. And again, making note of, okay, where's my painful limit? What's my limitation? Is it the same as it was when I tested it actively versus now I'm testing it passively? Test number two, we're gonna test through abduction. So again, you can do both at the same time for a comparison, instant comparison. We're gonna go through abduction, which is just 90 degrees away from the body. If it's a 0, that's 90, kind of like a snow angel movement. We're gonna take it up through range. Again, try not to hit your shoulders up towards your ears like so, but what you're gonna do is you're gonna go up until you feel a catch or a pinch or any kind of discomfort, and you're just gonna stop. You're gonna make that note, okay, in this case here, 3/4 of the range of motion, so 75%, or in my case here, maybe 120 degrees of range of motion through abduction. Now, step two, you're gonna use a stick again. This time my right hand is going to be at the base of the stick. I'm going to drive it through range of motion through abduction. So I'm going to use all the force coming from my right arm. My left hand is just going for the ride again. This time again, just going as far as I can, and make note of it. Where's my limitation? Am I going through full range of motion this time? Or am I restricted to that same motion at about 75%, or wherever you were stuck, the same as I was when I was doing the active test? Now, test number three, we're gonna test external rotation or internal rotation, and internal rotation, I guess. We're gonna go outwards, left versus right. Where am I? Keeping the elbows close to the body. We don't want them to be flaring out like so. Nice and close to the body. How far am I left versus right? Okay. So you can test this at neutral with our shoulders down. We can also test this up at 90 degrees, and you can do this lying down. I like doing this one a lot more lying down. It gives me a nice stable shoulder base. So at here, at this point, what we want to do is we're testing our internal rotation deficit, or our ability to rotate our shoulder inwards and outwards. So in our case here, starting up this position, keeping the shoulder blades nice and firm up against the floor, I'm going to rotate my arm downwards. How far can I go? And same thing, we're going to rotate this backwards. Okay. So again, making note of how far can I go downward, which is internal rotation, and how far can I go backwards, which is external rotation. Again, making notes of all these values so that we can differentiate between what's happening through our shoulder, whether it be a muscle injury or a stiff shoulder. Now, if you're getting any value out of this so far, please consider hitting that subscribe button and hit that like button as well, because it does help the YouTube algorithm. And thanks for doing that. I appreciate it. All right, so why is it important to know our active range of motion versus our passive range of motion values? That's because if you think about what's happening, if there's a passive structure or something blocking it, regardless of what's going on through our muscles, it's going to be restricted in our movement. So for example, if there's tightness in my capsule, tightness in my muscles, if I'm moving it through range of motion actively, I'm going to be restricted at that motion. Now if I'm using the stick and moving it to the same place, that muscle's not changing it at all, not really anyways, and that restriction is still going to be there regardless if it's active movement or passive movement. So that's why it's important to know, okay, is it my active range of motion tests versus my passive range of motion tests, how are they differing? Are they similar or are they quite different from one another? Now, on the other hand, if you can get a lot more motion with passive range of motion, so for example, if I take my stick and I can get full range of motion through flexion like that, but if I'm testing it actively, I can go 50%, 75%. That means there's likely something going on with the muscles, whether that be a weakness or some kind of active tear in the muscle. And that's gonna tell me, okay, maybe it's more of a muscular restriction, and that's why I can't move my shoulder through range of motion now. Does that make sense? Let me know in the comment section below. All right, so we kind of have an understanding, okay, is it passive structures that are restricting us or is it active structures that are restricting us, so muscles in that case. Now, we can also test the strength of our muscles. Now, for most people, the rotator cuff muscles are the ones that are most highly implicated. But let's say hypothetically you are dealing with some weakness, so you're able to move the range of motion with the stick, but you can't move it without the stick. So you're restricted actively, but you have full range of motion passively. Okay, how can we test these rotator cuffs? So there's 3 simple tests you can do here. Now, if you're interested, obviously this is just a generalization. It's hard to really isolate muscles in rotator cuffs with these tests. However, for our sake here, this is how we're gonna differentiate them. The first one, to test internal rotation, I like to do either pushing into my belly and just gently pushing into my belly and seeing if there's any kind of pain reproduction at my shoulder. If there is, that could be a positive indicator that there's an internal rotator or injury to the subscapularis muscle. The other way you can do this is doing a hand behind test and just kind of lifting off, or lift off test, and just lifting your hand up off your back and see if you can hold it there. Again, this is testing internal rotation ability to activate your internal rotator muscle. The second rotational movement through your rotator cuffs is external rotation. So you can either do this by having your hand on the opposite side, or you can have someone hold it for you, or you can put your body up against the wall. And what you're gonna do is you're gonna resist externally rotating. And see, again, same thing, is there any kind of pain reproduction through this motion here? Is it hurting me to kind of push my arm outwards and causing any discomfort? Now that could indicate some kind of injury to your external rotator. So in our case, our teres minor and our infraspinatus muscles. Now finally, we're gonna test our supraspinatus muscle, which helps with scaption movement, so abduction and scaption movement. For this one, what we can do is not out towards the side in abduction, not out in front in flexion, but about 30 to 45 degrees out toward the side. We're just gonna lift it up, straight up towards the air again. Any kind of pain reproduction could implicate the supraspinatus muscle, meaning that could be some injury to the muscle or some kind of tear to the muscle. So can you hold it here? That's a good indicator that it's not fully torn if you can actually hold it up here without it dropping down like this. If you can get it up there, add a little bit of resistance with your other hand. Can you resist that downward motion? Yes, you can, that's great. If there is some kind of pain reproduction, again, that might indicate that there is some kind of injury to the supraspinatus muscle and tendon. All right, so now you know how to differentiate your shoulder injury between stiffness or weakness. And again, this is just a simplification, but it's really effective, and I find it helps with 90% of my patients. Now, if your shoulder is weak and that's what's causing your pain and discomfort, I want you to watch this video over here, because that's gonna teach you how to strengthen your rotator cuff and get that shoulder to the next level. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Alright, and that's it guys. I best be getting the stick back to my daughter, otherwise she's gonna freak out at me.